Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast. NFL Week 17, the final Bet the Board podcast of calendar year 2022. Playoff races out in full force. Not a lot of marquee matchups in terms of win-loss record on the docket this week, but plenty of high-stakes implications. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, I want to know, after college yesterday, were you able to rest your voice and are the vocal cords on point, or were you officially listed as questionable on today's injury report?
Fighting through it. Somehow there was a part of yesterday's podcast where I was talking and just nothing was coming out. My voice just went kaput early on, but feels a little bit better. Did some warm drinks last night, and hopefully that helps.
Name of the game. Tea with honey is the best antidote for any ailments out there for those folks that work in a profession that have to lean on their voice. 5 big games for us to get to. A little bit of spoiler as far as our loyal listenership is concerned. We made an executive decision coming into this week that Titans and Cowboys, despite being the final game on Amazon Thursday Night Football, didn't warrant an in-depth breakdown. We're not exactly sure who's going to be out there for the Titans, if this game will look like
nobody.
A glorified preseason more than anything else. And we'll, of course, give the Titans their due diligence when they play for a right to win the AFC South next week against the Jacksonville Jaguars. But speaking of futility, especially in a...
we'll give a nugget.
Oh, okay.
Very sharp money under Dak passing attempts. Then I'll let you lead us to the promised land of our next game.
The biggest question is, will Dak be out there for 50% of the snaps, or will we see the Cowboys rest all their starters at halftime? Different discussion for a different day. But when you talk about the AFC South, we know the battle going on there between the Jags and Titans. The NFC South, mired in mediocrity in their own right. And, of course, the division will take center stage down there on the Gulf Coast in Tampa, where it's the Bucs, a field goal favorite, welcoming in the Carolina Panthers. The first meeting between these teams earlier this year, Carolina absolutely dismantled Tampa, winning outright as a double-digit underdog, the largest underdog this year to win a game outright. Total sits at 40.5, and as far as the playoff paths in the NFC South are concerned, the Bucs win. They secure passage to the postseason. A Carolina win puts them in control of their own destiny. They would need a win next week at New Orleans to be able to make that happen. And when you talk about that first meeting, I mean, the Panthers outrushed the Bucs 173-46. It was their first game after trading Christian McCaffrey, and when everyone thought the team was just going to lie down for the remainder of the season, it actually served as an inflection point. When you look at Tom Brady, he has only been swept by a divisional opponent twice in his entire career, against the Saints in 2020 and 2021. We'll see if history repeats itself for a third time. When you look at Tom Brady, his teams have outscored Sam Darnold's teams in the past 112-20 in 3 matchups. That, of course, includes the Patriots' 33-0 win versus the Jets in 2019, the infamous I see ghosts from Sam Darnold in that performance. When you look at Carolina, their current form, they've covered 5 straight games as an underdog, 5-4 straight up, 7-2 ATS since that Christian McCaffrey trade. Meanwhile, Tampa, they have been the model of futility, 1-11-1 ATS in their past 13 games, the worst in the NFL, failing to cover 5 straight. It's actually the worst cover percentage in a season at 21% since the 2014 Tennessee Titans. Payne, I don't want to oversimplify the handicap, but when you look at Carolina, last week we saw them bludgeon Detroit at the point of contact. They ran over, around, and through that Lions defense that was down to Sean Elliott. Hat tip to our boy Watt05, who highlighted Carolina as being a live underdog in the Bet the Board weekly column. But is it as straightforward? If Carolina can run the football, they get out of Tampa with a win, and if Carolina stops them on the ground, they'll do enough offensively against the Carolina defense down its top cover corner in J.C. Horn.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good start, you know. And I think the other interesting part here that no one's talking about, but we've understood it quietly behind the scenes, is Sam Darnold's playing at a pretty good level. I mean, Carolina isn't asking him to throw a ton. to your point, it's about the run game. Carolina's pass rate is 14% below expectation with Darnold in the lineup, but when he is throwing, he's really pushing it down the field, and that's creating some space in the ground game because teams know that they have to defend intermediate and deep passes, and he's just stressing defenses downfield. And if you look, Darnold, number 1 in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation since taking over in Week 12 among quarterbacks with at least 100 dropbacks, and that's carried over to team success. The Panthers have the most efficient passing attack when adjusting for schedule over that same stretch. But ultimately, to your main point in question, Carolina's run game is the key factor. It's really been better since trading away Christian McCaffrey. And if you look on the season, first 6 weeks with CMC, Carolina's 20th in schedule-adjusted rush efficiency. But what is surprising to me, without CMC, 16th. And I think that will shock people because the perception is Carolina's ground game has been dominant, and it was last week against the Lions, who had really been stopping the run the past 4 to 6 weeks. The week prior against Pittsburgh, Carolina couldn't get anything going. And so that's the interesting component here, is because Carolina has, a ton of swings from game to game, that their metrics aren't screaming massive improvement on the ground. But again, right, like 320 against the Lions defense, that's been stout last week, and then they're running for 21 yards and a 9% success rate against the Steelers run defense, who had kind of shown some vulnerabilities there, specifically against Baltimore in that Week 14 matchup. I know the Buccaneers are hoping Vita Vea can play. The practice report shows he logged a light practice Wednesday, but I was told no one actually saw Vita Vea out there yesterday.
He might have been at the team cafeteria, Payne. You never know if he's out there in some capacity.
Too, right?
I mean, it is what it is. It's easy to miss a 330-pound defensive lineman.
So, Tampa's run defense has slipped a touch, right? It's not just Vita Vea with the calf injury. You're down Shaq Barrett. You've had some guys beat up along the defensive line. I know Arizona wasn't necessarily overly efficient running it, but James Conner had a couple nice runs there, and you had situations where like Hicks is lining up at defensive end and crashing down into the middle and making plays, but like, why is he lining up at defensive end? It's because they're a little bit beaten along that defensive line. But oddly, still above average in schedule-adjusted rush efficiency since the Week 11 bye for Tampa. And, the first time they played each other back in Week 7, maybe Tampa was caught off a little guard with that new running scheme and style, going from CMC to the two-headed back with Chuba and Deontay Fuhrman. So I think what's really interesting, and we can, I don't know if we want to transition to the other side quickly. I'll let you do that, or we just shoot straight to it. But I think as you kind of build this game out and try to make a case for either side, it's just hard to ignore, the line movement when you couple it with the injury report. And, a week ago, this is Buccaneers -7. There was even a couple spots showing 7.5. And so this is one of the largest week-over-week movements of the entire season. It's 4.5 points. Through the second largest key number, now sitting on the most important one, and there's no quarterback change. I mean, back in Week 7, Tampa's laying 13.5 in Carolina, and I know these teams are a little bit different now, and no doubt Carolina beat the Buccaneers handling that Week 7 matchup, but I just don't know how you get to this price, and it looks like Tampa has a chance to be healthier along the O-line. Donovan Smith and Tristan Wirfs practice on Wednesday. You had Pro Bowl center Ryan Jensen was out there practicing and doing blocking drills. Let's see if he plays. Tampa opened that 21-day window, and teams are actually treating that a little differently this season. Typically like, oh, he can start practicing, we're going to open it. This season, they've been waiting a little bit longer for players to almost be healthy enough to play before opening that window. So somehow you get Wirfs, Smith, and Jensen up, like that's huge for the Bucs offense. And then for Carolina, we know their starting corner Dante Jackson's been out. Now J.C. Horn, one of the best cover corners in the league, is out. Carolina signed Josh Norman back this week. They think he might be able to get a couple snaps in there. Shaq Thompson found himself on the injury report with a hamstring injury. We know how quirky those can be. And so for me, the question becomes like, will Byron Leftwich smartly navigate this with more early down passing? You have to be able to attack Carolina through the air on the season, 24th in schedule adjusted pass defense, and their top two corners are now down. And you look at Tampa in terms of efficiency on the season, on first down, 9th in passing efficiency. 31st in rushing efficiency. So the smart game plan is crystal clear here for the Buccaneers. It's just a matter of actually getting Byron Leftwich to go out and execute the smart plan. And if they do, with this short price, it's tough not to make a case for Tampa here at this number.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Ryan Jensen, though, I'd be stunned if he was out there given some of Todd Bowles' comments talking about how he's still nowhere close to playing, but we've seen this smoke and mirrors work in the past for a lot of these coaches in the NFL. The Josh Norman story, fascinating. Read some of those details. He said he was working in a coffee shop actually across the street from Cam Newton's cigar bar in Atlanta. Said he really enjoyed being a barista because he felt it was a mindless activity and allowed him to be at peace with himself. And here he is being thrust into the thick of a playoff race. We know he can provide a little bit of energy, but was obviously a shell of himself. The last time we saw him on a football field.
I did not read that.
Yeah, it was pretty good. I'll have to try and dig up the article. They did it
because that's what I've depicted to you. Like, when I'm done, I'm done. Like, I'm just going somewhere far away and just doing something stupid.
Let me tell you, as someone who was a barista, as an assistant manager of a Starbucks at 18 years old in Burlington, Vermont, there are times it's a little stressful. I'm not sure you're built for customer service because if you don't make someone's caramel macchiato exactly the way they want it, they can get a little bit enraged at 8 o'clock in the morning. But yes, there's a lot to be said about the service industry instead of being glued to checking emails and everything else. So I don't want this to sound like a negative for a lot of our listeners that are out there. But a fascinating story, obviously, given all the money that Norman made in the NFL. That's what he chose to do after when you thought broadcasting was most likely going to be the avenue for him. As far as Tampa's offense, real quick, I mean, you mentioned it, 12.3 fewer points per game this season compared with last season. It's actually the largest decline by any team since the 75-76 Bills, who finished 12.5 points worse than they did the preceding year. When you look at third down conversions, nothing to write home about. And I think you highlighted the key issue. Will Tampa be aggressive enough to go out there, attack on early downs? When you look at the no-huddle offense, I've kind of called it no-nonsense. 9th in EPA, play with no-huddle, and 29th without this season. You look at Brady, 11 passing touchdowns in the fourth quarter compared to just 10 through the first three quarters, and they've won 3 games when trailing by 7+ points in the fourth quarter, tied for the second most in the NFL. So they've shown it in flashes. You just like to see it sustained over the course of 4 quarters. And for Tampa, for everything that's gone wrong during the regular season, a win on Sunday, and suddenly you get a new lease on life.
They've shown it when they've been forced to, and they're wildly efficient doing it. Imagine if they actually didn't when the team didn't know you had to do it.
Yeah.
Right?
On the opening series
when the defense
of the game,
didn't know you had to do it, right? You'd probably be even more efficient using it.
How much easier life could be. But to Tampa's credit, they at least showed flashes of having offensive competency in the first half against the Bengals. Just couldn't execute in the second half. But an interesting game, mainly for, like you said, the number that has over-adjusted, arguably, given one extra data point, Carolina dominating Detroit, and Tampa, of course, needing to go to overtime to knock off the much-maligned Arizona Cardinals. The Dolphins and Patriots, Payne, we've seen major movement on this game as well, obviously because the availability or lack thereof for Miami's starting quarterback. New England, a field goal favorite. There are plenty of soft threes throughout the market. Total on the game, 41.5. Miami, they've beaten New England 4 straight times. They've defeated the Patriots 20-7 in week 1 at home. It was actually 92 degrees at kickoff. It was the hottest outdoor NFL game since 2019. Ironically enough, that was also the Dolphins' best defensive performance of the entire season. Miami has made their path to the playoffs much more convoluted than it needed to be. They get in with a win and a Jets loss. Meanwhile, New England, they win out. They find themselves dancing again. Obviously, week 18, they have the Buffalo Bills and a trip to Orchard Park waiting in their future. We can talk about X's and O's. We can try and break down some of the matchups here, but I think the number more than anything else is the most fascinating part because the betting market, Payne, is telling me that Tua Tagovailoa being out is a 6-point downgrade when he hands the baton to the veteran in Teddy Bridgewater.
Yeah, that's roughly what it's saying, right? I mean, the Dolphins open 2.5-point favorite. We've now gravitated towards New England +3, obviously going through the 0, not huge, but landing on that 3, roughly 6 points in numerical value there. And so that becomes the ultimate question. And we know how well Tua was playing through large stretches of this season, how valuable he was to the Dolphins, but I don't think we get to a 6-point adjustment when we go down to Teddy Bridgewater. And I think when you look at Teddy, when you look at his skill set, the one thing that's been lacking from Miami's passing offense is the short pass attack. And I think Teddy's going to be a little bit more willing to check that thing down, to find the underneath receiver, to not incessantly hunt the deep ball. And this will be a game plan actually tailored to Bridgewater, because you think about his performances this season within the offense, and he played really well at Cincinnati, but he got thrown into the fire, and that was, I believe, a short week Thursday night game. And then he comes in versus Minnesota in a game that was tailored for Skylar Thompson. The one game plan that was actually tailored for Teddy was the Jets game, and he left after the first snap. So I think he might have some success here. And then you start to focus on the Patriots' secondary injuries. Have to monitor those. Jack Jones, Marcus Jones, Jalen Mills, all DNPs on Wednesday. I think the other thing that you have to look for here is obviously how Teddy handles pressure. Getting the ball out quick, right? Getting that short pass game going will make a lot of sense because the Patriots are certainly getting pressure on the quarterback still. It's the best element of their defense, top 3 in pressure rate. And then just quickly on the other side, the way you have to attack the Dolphins, because they're very vulnerable through the air. Is that really what New England can do right now? It would certainly be a change from what we've seen, right? I mean, New England's 25th in schedule-adjusted pass efficiency. Mac Jones has not performed overly well, especially of late. And if you strip out the deflected Hail Mary in the fourth quarter against the Bengals, they've been very, very poor.
By the way, good for Jacoby Myers being on the right end of one of those things, even though it didn't help them win the football game. But good to see the universe balance itself out.
Yeah. So, I mean, that ultimately becomes the way that you have to attack the Dolphins, and then the things that we've continued to talk about, because I feel like we've broken down every single Dolphins game for about 5 weeks now. You know, you got to get Ramondre Stevenson and Hunter Henry involved in the pass game, right? Running backs, tight ends, that's how you focus your passing game. But maybe that helps Mac Jones, but certainly pushing the ball downfield, he hasn't been great doing that. We've seen Miami been able to enhance their pressure rate, top 5 in that regard since the acquisition of Bradley Chubb. So this very much, to me, is a situation where now that we are at 3, you're going to see a little bit of a differing of opinion. Would not shock me to see professional money come in, grab the Dolphins at that price of 3, and we close somewhere at 2.5. Now, let's not get it twisted, right? It's all about market entry. There was a group that came in early this week, got out ahead probably an hour before the news actually broke on Tua and took 2 with the Patriots, but it's just a far different conversation. We sit here Thursday morning talking Dolphins plus 3, and I believe ultimately we're going to close below that number.
And you mentioned Ramondre Stevenson. When you look at his recent run of form, we back out the Raiders game, he's averaged under 3 yards per carry in 2 of his last 3 games. The Bengals did a phenomenal job there. Mac Jones did a lot of his damage in the second half when the Bengals were protecting a 22-0 lead. You talked about the big play on the deflected ball to ended up in Jacoby Myers' hands, a variety of other things that inflated the stat line, leading to Mac Jones putting forth one of his better QBRs in recent weeks. And I'll go back to, Teddy Bridgewater, when you mentioned some of the games that he started. The Dolphins defense didn't force a turnover in any of those 3 losses against the Bengals, the Jets, and the Vikings. The Dolphins had double-digit penalties against the Jets and Vikings, the only 2 times it's actually happened this season. And let's also not ignore the fact that one of their building blocks along that offensive line that you highlight every time we talk about the Dolphins, Terron Armstead missed the last 3+ quarters against the Jets. We know Skylar Thompson was out there after Teddy Bridgewater left the game, and the entire game against Minnesota. So there were other things other than just the change at quarterback that really impacted those final stat lines. I did like the optimism in reading some of the comments from Dolphins players, specifically coming from Jeff Wilson, when asked about where the Dolphins felt they were. And I quote, "Oh, we're a contender. We're a top dog, not only in this division or conference, but in the league. And obviously when your record and the wins and losses don't reflect that, it's frustrating because it's more so not only that we're good enough, it's things that are almost self-inflicted, like we do it to ourselves." So this is clearly a Dolphins team that hasn't lost belief in themselves, and they're a fumble away last week against the Green Bay Packers with Raheem Mostert. They're a play or 2 away against the Bills. Let's see if they put it on full display here with so much still left to play for.
That's what it almost feels like, right? Is that we kind of marked this point in their season where we said, hey, let's find out if they're for real. The schedule gets a little bit more difficult. And the overarching viewpoint was they failed miserably. And certainly you go out on the road and you play San Francisco. Well, okay. I mean, that looks like the best team in football right now. It doesn't matter who's under center. I mean, we saw Kyle Shanahan whip up a fantastic game plan against an elite Washington defense last week and just ran roughshod in a team in a must-win situation where they had very little to play for. So suddenly that law doesn't look as bad as it was. Now you get out-schemed by Brandon Staley, sure. But, man, the effort in Buffalo your third straight road game. After spending 2 weeks on the West Coast, you go to Buffalo in frigid temperatures and you're up 29-20. You just can't close the thing out. And then last week, you're at midfield, you're up 20-10. You're going in for a 3-score lead before halftime. Mostert fumbles it, and you got a quarterback that plays with a concussion the back half of that game, and you drop it. So there's been some nice flashes where at least the last 2 weeks, Miami's actually shown quite well, despite the viewpoint that they've just come crumbling down because of the schedule strength increasing.
Exactly right. And we talk about it all the time in this business. Sometimes you can learn a lot more about a team, even at this level, with 16 data points already in the bank, how they handle adversity and what they look like going forward. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You, of course, can follow me there as well. Most importantly, as always, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And we mentioned the Dolphins, Payne, but we'd be remiss if we didn't mention one of their division rivals, a team they're competing for to crash the back half of the AFC playoff picture. And that, of course, would be the New York Jets, who will travel all the way out to the Pacific Northwest to take on the Seattle Seahawks with a change at quarterback. And you've seen the market respond accordingly as a result. The Seahawks actually opened as short home favorites. We now see the Jets modest 1.5-point road chalk. Total in the game, 42.5. It's the Geno Smith and the Pete Carroll revenge game of sorts. Geno, of course, drafted by the Jets in 2013. Pete Carroll let go as Jets head coach after just one season. And Pete Carroll, on his weekly radio interview this week and up in Seattle, asked about Geno Smith and him getting up more for the game. I don't know if he gets up any more than I do. Pete said when he was laughing, I was there for a while too. They sent me packing. Geno and I, we might ride this one out together. When you look at the Jets, they still need a little bit of help, but we know the locker room has rallied around Mike White. I don't expect him to go out there and look like the second coming of Patrick Mahomes or anybody else along those lines. But clearly this is a Jets locker room galvanized by the change at quarterback, and they may have some matchup advantages on the outside against the Seahawks passing attack that's really struggled in recent weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very clear the Jets still have life. They weren't sure that would be the case after dumping the game Thursday night to Jacksonville, but the way things played out for the other teams that were kind of middling and in the playoff hunt, they just unfolded the right way, and the Jets are like, hey, all of a sudden we can win out and have the Patriots lose or tie either game hosting Miami or at Buffalo, and we're in. And so it kind of regalvanized them with Mike White's addition back. He certainly brings a little more life and energy to the offense because guys believe in him. And past that, though, right, looked like $1 million against a Bears defense that's dead last in efficiency. The 2 games after that, you had the comfy dome game against a below-average Vikings defense, and then in Buffalo with some weather. Neither of those performances were anything to write home to mom about. Not great. To put Mike White's performance in perspective, right, of quarterbacks this season with at least 100 dropbacks, he's QB 23 out of 47 in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation. So not as good as the hype.
Top half of the league, baby. Not as good as the New York media would leave you to believe, but certainly better than Zach Wilson and Joe Flacco, who are QB 42 and 44 out of 47. So it is an upgrade. We've seen that in the market with the initial move on the Jets this week because everyone was getting out ahead of the inevitable Mike White news. So this open Jets +2 at Chris, favorite flipped, got out as high as Jets -2.5, and that's where we've seen resistance come in, and we've settled at Jets -2, -1.5, depending on where you shop there. And there are respected guys I speak with that make Seattle a favorite on a neutral still. And Seattle is still in the mix as well, right? I mean, they're hosting both the Jets and the Rams the next 2 weeks. If Seattle wins out, they have nearly a 75% chance of making the playoffs with 2 wins. So you're going to get an elite home field advantage with the 12th man here. Now, specific to like Mike White and some of the matchups, he's going to throw the ball, right? That's just kind of what they do. He's averaged more than 45 dropbacks in his 3 starts. Jets really haven't been able to run the football. 28th in schedule-adjusted rush efficiency since Week 8 with Breece Hall and Elijah Tucker going down for the season. Now, Seattle hasn't been stout against the run by any means, but it's not like the Jets have faced tough run defenses to have these kinds of struggles, but maybe they try. Seattle isn't great defending the pass either, to your point, but
you're coming off games against Kyle Shanahan's offense and on the road against Reed and Patrick Mahomes. So this is just a slight dip in competition this week.
I can't stand for this Mike White slander here. They're making him out to be the great white hope, but I guess when you've had to watch Zach Wilson for a season and a half, anything is an instant upgrade.
Well, that is the hope, that he's the great white hope, and he's not a contender for the remake of Samuel L. Jackson's The Great White Hype. I think it's worth mentioning, but I'm not sure who it favors, right? Mike LaFleur, the Jets offensive coordinator, previously spent time with Kyle Shanahan. Shanahan and the 49ers have had great success moving it on some better Seattle defenses. So Mike LaFleur is cognizant on how to attack a Seattle defense. But in saying that, I mean, Seattle faced a better version of this offense like 2 weeks ago, right, on Thursday Night Football. So I'm not quite sure who has the edge there, Todd, but it's certainly worth mentioning.
Yeah, I mean, Coach Saleh pretty much said he's prepared for this environment. Sometimes them can be fighting words for the Seattle Seahawks fans who will be at full throat, but has tried to do everything he can to prepare himself for this kind of environment. So many fascinating aspects. Payne, what do you make of Geno Smith's regression, or is this obviously just who Geno is as there's more and more tape on him?
It's a good question. I think, the offense has started to trend downward since the trip to Germany. I don't know if the numbers are as bad as people are making them out to be, because if you look, they're still an above average offense in efficiency. So they haven't completely fallen off the cliff, but Seattle was, a top 10 offense heading into that Buccaneers game. Sounds like Tyler Lockett is at least pushing to return. Who knows how impactful he'll be there, but it could be huge just when you look at this matchup and what the Jets have done to opposing teams' number one receiver. But yeah, I think Geno is obviously going to be motivated for this. And what does that mean, right? I mean, it's a playoff-like game. So does the level get above 100? We like to say no, but my feeling is, Geno Smith probably isn't going out much this week. He's probably spending more time watching film. He's probably doing all the little things that help you prepare just a little bit better than you would if it were a different week. In saying that, right, like you look at the weapons there, with Tyler Lockett down, with some injuries to running back, I think that's partly why we've seen Geno slip just a little bit. But I mean, that's going to be important this week because of what I just mentioned, with the Jets being very good limiting teams' opposing receivers that are number one, right? Top 7 in target rate, yards per target, and EPA per target allowed. So if DK Metcalf performs below expectation, having a guy like Tyler Lockett would be extremely helpful. And I think we also have to keep an eye on the starting tackle there. Abraham Lucas for Seattle left the Chiefs game early with a thigh injury, didn't practice on Wednesday, so keep that monitored. But to your point, kind of a fun matchup here with the narrative-based stuff with Pete and Geno, and probably some level of added motivation. Maybe this week just means a little bit more. We'll see. But this is very much good on good, right? The Jets have the best unit on the field in this game. They're still 6th in schedule-adjusted defense. They've played a very tough schedule of opposing offenses, actually the toughest in the NFL. I think Seattle will be smart to try and get their tight ends involved here. That's kind of been the one area where the Jets have been susceptible defensively, bottom 8 in both reception rate and yards allowed to the tight end position. But ultimately, this game becomes about price, and I think there's just wildly different viewpoints on what these two teams are from pro bettors, and that's been the reason for the ping pong line movement. I don't necessarily want to be caught in that battle straight up, but with a playoff like game, you have this low total that's now trending to 41.5, and you still have +2 and 1.5 in the market. Seattle's going to be a pretty popular teaser leg among pro bettors this week.
Oh, nothing says playoff atmosphere like a Noah Fant and Will Dissly game. Like we could see a full display from the Seahawks. I did find it interesting. You mentioned Tyler Lockett. Pete Carroll and company were pretty open about it, saying that they really felt his absence against Kansas City, knowing that he is such a key cog in their ability to move the chains, especially as a third down guy. What I find more enigmatic than anything else, though, Pete Carroll indicated Tyler Lockett did everything during Seattle's walkthrough earlier on Wednesday, including catching passes without any issues, yet he's officially listed as a DNP on the practice report. So take from that what you will. We'll see exactly what kind of contributions Tyler Lockett can make when push comes to shove. But even if he's out there, I'd use him as a decoy and force the Jets to at least respect him in the first quarter until they know you can't actually throw a pass to him. From the Jets and Seahawks game, the two familiar foes that'll renew acquaintances in the Vikings and Packers. Green Bay suddenly from the depths of despair in the abyss, sitting at 4-8, now with playoff probabilities better than 30%. And you shop around the market right around plus $1.70, plus $1.80 to get into the NFC tournament. You're looking at Green Bay more than a field goal favorite here. 3.5's pretty much painted. The consensus on this game is 48. We sound like a broken record when we talk about the Minnesota Vikings. Worst point differential, +5 of any team with 12-plus wins through 15 games in NFL history. An NFL record, 11-0 in one-score games. No greater illustration of that than relying on Greg Joseph to bang through a 61-yard field goal against the New York Giants last weekend. The Packers' playoff path win out and have the Commanders lose one of their final two, or the Giants lose out. They can become the third team ever to start 4-8 or worse through the first 12 games and make the playoffs, joining the likes of the 2008 Chargers and the 2014 Carolina Panthers. When you look at Aaron Rodgers, much like we talked about Tom Brady early in the show, has only been swept by a divisional opponent once in his entire career when he actually started and finished both games. That came in 2009 versus Brett Favre's Minnesota Vikings. He did lose twice to the Lions in 2018, but he left early in the second quarter with a concussion in the 2018 regular season finale. When you look at Aaron Rodgers overall, though, from a win-loss record, the Vikings have kind of been his kryptonite, 5-7-1 straight up the last 13 games. Payne, we know the Vikings have been the most polarizing team. The general media wants to laud them for that gaudy record. We know how professional bettors in the analytics community continues to view them in that particular lens. When you look at the price here, fair or foul with Green Bay more than a field goal favorite?
That's a good question. Listen, we opened 2.5, and we're now out to like 3.3. It's not the public moving that game this early in the week. So there has been some respected money on the Packers without question. And I thought I'd be making a case for Green Bay this week, and some of the things that we don't like to talk about, right? Must win. The Packers have won 3 in a row. They've really figured things out, right? And Minnesota's overrated, to your point. That's been all the talk. And Minnesota's away from the dome, and it's a non-1 o'clock start time for Kirk Cousins.
He could melt like a pumpkin.
Right. I mean, Minnesota's not playing for a ton. And then I really dug into this game, and I've kind of cooled on the Packers now that we've gone above the 3. And you just kind of look at the defenses Minnesota's played since week 9. Washington, Buffalo, Dallas, Belichick, the Jets, a Lions defense trending towards average, a Colts defense that hasn't given up clearly, and they're still playing at a top 10 rate. And then the Giants, who aren't great, but schematically blitz and play man coverage behind it. That's a style of defense that has given Cousins some trouble over the years. And that's not what Minnesota's facing here against Green Bay. And the Packers are 29th in EPA per play allowed since week 10, giving up the most yards per play over that stretch. On the season, Green Bay's dead last in schedule-adjusted rush efficiency, dead last since week 10 in EPA per rush allowed. So Dalvin Cook is going to be able to keep that offense balanced, maybe not have as much on Kirk Cousins' shoulders. And the other thing that we've incessantly talked about that is now picking up steam throughout the space, the Packers play a ton of zone coverage with their defensive scheme, right? And Green Bay lives in zone on nearly 75% of defensive snaps, something Kirk Cousins has shown a tendency to eat up. They're coming off a 4-game stretch, Minnesota, where they're playing nothing but top 10 man coverage rate defenses. So this is going to be a breath of fresh air here for Kirk Cousins seeing a zone defense. The other thing that we've started to see with the Packers is they're blitzing at enormously high rates, but they're not getting home. So if that continues to happen here, I mean, Kirk Cousins is going to have some success finding guys down the field. I also look at this recent winning streak by Green Bay, and it feels kind of meh, the deeper you look, right? Like you're trailing Chicago by 2 scores heading to the fourth quarter, and you charge back. Like, Congrats, right? You beat the Rams in freezing temps at Lambeau. You're trailing by double digits to the Dolphins, and Miami's going to make it a 3-score game before half, and then Mostert fumbles and Tua suffers a concussion. So I really thought Green Bay would make my dance card here, Todd, and to this point, the more I dig, the more I sour a little bit.
You know what's wild? When you look at full body of work, and we talk about the fluidity and how the betting market is supposed to be the ultimate model of efficiency, here comes the Minnesota Vikings sitting with the record, division champions already. Green Bay fighting for their playoff lives. The number before the season started on this game was Green Bay minus 6.5, and here we are with the Packers, a 3.5-point favorite when you look at the disparity in win-loss, and it just goes to show the level of sophistication and how much different things are, where in years past, these kind of records would have suggested a much shorter number, and you'd have the opportunities to lay a 2.5 in Green Bay in this kind of spot.
Oh, I'm aware of the number. And that's probably why I'm not charging to take 3.3 here. That's one, if you check your portfolio, you'll see in there, Todd. The other thing here is, like, you go back just like 1 week ago, kind of picking up the point against the Dolphins. It's not really the most impressive performance from Green Bay offensively, right? It's 3 points on a negative 9-yard drive to start the game. It's a touchdown on 54 yards, a field goal on 21 yards. It's a field goal on 4 yards, a field goal on 56 yards. There's only one great Packers drive that goes 11 plays, 78 yards, and ends up in 7. And in terms of success rate, Green Bay finished the week below expectation against a below-average Dolphins defense. And I think the other thing that's kind of not being talked about here from a lot of the guys that are making case for the Packers, like, the health of the Packers offense was really progressing and giving you some hope, and that's kind of gone awry. Like, Aaron Jones is battling an ankle injury. Had like a 38% snap share last week. I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about Aaron Jones last week, okay? Son of a bitch.
But the point is, like, it wasn't really in the game plan, then re-injured it on the first carry of the second half. And then Christian Watkins left the game early with a hip injury, didn't return, hasn't practiced yet this week. You have other guys that are just finding themselves on the injury report, right? Aaron Rodgers suddenly finds himself on the injury report with a knee injury, didn't practice on Wednesday. You can go find that film. It's a Christian Watkins sack, and he is very, very ginger getting up with that knee injury. So those are some things that are really interesting to me. Now, if the Packers are healthy and they take the right approach, which we saw the Giants smartly execute last week, that's the game plan. That's the right approach on how to attack Minnesota, and this suddenly becomes a pass-first Green Bay offense. You're going to have something here, but that just hasn't been the MO of the Packers. They want to run it. They're 20th in pass rate over expectation. On early downs, it's even more slanted towards the run. I mean, if you want to exploit the Vikings defense, it's through the air. I mean, whether it's EPA, success rate, schedule adjusted efficiency, Vikings are bottom third in the league defending the pass. And that's in a season where, you think about this in the right context, that's in a season where 33-year-old Patrick Peterson is playing out of his mind, having his third best season ever, and Minnesota still can't stop the pass. Now, the positive is, it looks like starting corner Cam Dantzler is back. That's huge. But that doesn't really negate the point that you want to attack Minnesota through the air. And you can kind of see, if you're looking at like underlying things, trying to figure out what these teams truly are, the Vikings are clearly searching for fixes late in the season, knowing that this is their Achilles heel, that this can prevent them from making a playoff run. Their zone concepts weren't working, and now they're trying to implement high rates of man coverage. They're kind of grasping at straws here a little bit, Todd.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Aaron Rodgers, Payne, he's actually got a worse completion percentage, yards per attempt, and a touchdown-interception ratio during this win streak than he does for the entire body of work. You mentioned the injury to Christian Watson. How important is that? 7.5 yards per attempt with Christian Watson on the field this season for Rodgers. That number dips all the way to 6.3 with him off. You'd love to see Watson and Romeo Doubs operate out there in conjunction and harmony with one another. There have only been 28 pass attempts with those two talented rookies out there. And if Aaron Jones is nicked up, we know A.J. Dillon is a little bit limited there. And I think so much of what you highlighted there, the Packers' success during this win streak has been attributed to the defense. But you said it perfectly. There's noise in those numbers. It's the Chicago Bears. It's the Los Angeles Rams in frigid temperatures, and the Packers' defensive numbers even last week against the Dolphins get inflated because the Dolphins don't muster a single point in the second half, which we now, of course, came as a byproduct of Tua being concussed, potentially leading to those interceptions. So I think there's a lot of noise in there, and while Green Bay becomes a very interesting story, obviously with star power getting into the playoffs, I think they move the needle significantly more than a team like the Washington Commanders. We may need to pump the brakes in terms of their ability to run away and hide from a Viking side that would most likely love nothing more than to keep them home for the holidays going forward. Last but certainly not least, Sunday Night Football, and some interesting comments coming out of this game. When you look at Ravens players wondering why this game was even flexed to Sunday Night Football, but it's Baltimore, a 2.5-point home favorite. Total on the game, 35. When you look at the Steelers, they are hanging on to their playoff hopes by a thread. A Miami Dolphins win earlier in the day would end those dreams in improbable fashion. This is a rivalry separated by 1 point during the Mike Tomlin era, 696 to 695. It'll mark the 33rd meeting between Mike Tomlin and John Harbaugh, the second most common head coaching matchup in NFL history. The Ravens won the previous meeting 16-14 as a 2-point road underdog. They outrushed the Steelers in that game 215 to 65. Tyler Huntley finished 8-12, 88 yards. Lamar Jackson, of course, DNP. Kenny Pickett knocked out of that game in the first quarter with a concussion, and it was a Mitchell Trubisky moving the Steelers up and down the field, just done in by 3 interceptions, all coming in plus territory. The Ravens and Steelers, Payne, come into this game having the top 2 total defenses since Week 9. Steelers number 1 in that department since TJ Watt returned, allowing 17 points per game and less than 275 yards per contest. Meanwhile, the Ravens number 2 over the last 7 games since the Roquan Smith trade, allowing 12.7 points per game and 284 yards per contest. When you look at the Ravens, 6-1 of the under the last 7. The Steelers 7-3 ATS over the last 10 games. We've already seen dog money. We've already seen under money. Which is the most compelling matchup for you to watch Sunday night?
You've never really seen groups run to go under 36.5, but that's what transpired here, and it makes your opening all the more succinct. I think what's really interesting in this game, it's very straightforward, right? And I think partly what we've seen is there two offenses that are trending in different directions metrically, and that's why the dog money's come in. And you kind of just look, first 9 weeks, Baltimore's 4th in offensive efficiency. Since the bye for Baltimore in Week 10, the Ravens are 23rd in schedule-adjusted offensive efficiency. They're really playing like a middling team. Pittsburgh, the complete opposite, 24th in offensive efficiency pre-bye, 11th post-bye. And you had Baltimore clinch a playoff berth last week. Certainly the 5 seed is valuable in the AFC because you're rather, go to Jacksonville or Tennessee as opposed to dip into the 6th seed and go into Cincinnati, Kansas City, or Buffalo, however that shakes out atop the AFC. There aren't going to be many points scored, obviously, with Chris now at 34.5, and every yard's valuable, and there's nothing wrong with a few first downs and a punt that flips field position. And that's ultimately what transpired in that first meeting in Pittsburgh, right? I mean, Baltimore was a net 17% in rushing success rate, so it just depicts like being better on both lines of scrimmages. Since the acquisition of Roquan Smith, Baltimore's number 1 in schedule-adjusted run defense. Opposing teams' running game is basically operating at 38% below expectation on average since Week 9. That's what Roquan Smith's done for that Baltimore defense. But the number 2 run defense over that same time frame is actually Pittsburgh, but schematically, they just got beat up a little bit against Baltimore. Now you're getting Tyler Huntley again. You've seen what that looks like. You saw a little glimpse of him last year in that game as well. This is now your 3rd matchup against him, and you kind of can tell that he's pretty limited as a passer, and some guys are dinged up as pass catchers for Baltimore again this week. I think this ultimately comes down to which of the quarterbacks, right, Pickett or Huntley, is going to provide some level of balance, right? Come up with that one rhythm drive through the air. And you just look at the difference in weapons, you would think that advantage would go to Pickett, right? We certainly saw Mitchell Trubisky have...
Talking poorly about the caliber of Baltimore's wide receivers, guys that I wouldn't want to play on a flag football team unless my life depended on it.
You've seen, right, like... Mitchell Trubisky, you referenced it, right? Had the 3 interception performance, but he was damn good throughout the course of that game. But basically, what you're looking at here is metrically quarterback 31 in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation among 56 quarterbacks this season with at least 100 dropbacks in Kenny Pickett, and then you have Tyler Huntley, 32nd. So I mean, just you remove the interceptions from Mitch in the first meeting. It's tough to do that, but obviously they changed the game. He was fantastic on virtually every other throw, right? I mean, quarterback 7 in week 14 in EPA plus completion percentage over expectation for Mitch Trubisky with the 3 interceptions incorporated in. So Pickett is going to have some opportunities through the air. Marcus Peters is dealing with the calf injury still. I'm just not quite sure what Pickett is. You look at the scoreboard last week, he was obviously a disaster, and it gets camouflaged because of the game-winning drive. But then I went back and looked a little bit. He wasn't completely horrific, but you would have liked him to perform a little bit better against the worst passing defense of the Raiders in the NFL. It was kind of alarming to me. I thought he'd have more success there, and he just didn't. But he's going to have some opportunities here because I'm just not sure how that ground game is going to go. But again, like, one thing about a game like this, and to your point, I'm not quite sure why it was flexed to Sunday night. It's obviously a rivalry game. Pittsburgh still has an outside shot at the playoffs. They're playing for another winning season. The matchups in this game aren't really fun to talk about. They're very much like ABC 1, 2, 3 paint by number. Like, who's the bigger man, right? That's very much what this game is. Like, who's going to come out of the alley? But, you know, pro bettors knew Lamar wasn't going to play, so the number basically was grabbed at anything 3.5 or better. And to me, when you look at this total again at 34.5 and you're down to 2.5, like, Pittsburgh makes one of the best teaser legs this season.
When do we see Lamar again? Do we see him week 18, or are the Ravens just going to hold him out into the playoffs now, knowing that they clinched a berth in the AFC playoffs?
I think you'd like him to at least build up a lather, right? I mean, going into the playoffs without him playing in what would be, 4 or 5 weeks, you'd at least like to get him into a rhythm, get him through the game day routine. If he's healthy enough to be out there, and as I referenced, that 5th seed is actually quite valuable because, you know, you'd much rather go on the road against Jacksonville or the Titans as opposed to going to Buffalo, Cincinnati, or Kansas City. I think you could potentially see him out there, but you'll know this week, right? I mean, that was the one thing. They opened this line this week with Lamar might have a chance to play.
We've heard
he
that
wasn't
3
out
weeks
there
in
at
a
all
row.
last week. Yeah, I mean, he has not thrown a pass. He has not been at practice. Like, he's just not doing anything. And so the immediate consensus was, as soon as Wednesday comes in the practice, we were pretty dialed in there. Their practice on Wednesday started at 1:10 exactly. And as soon as he wasn't out there, it was like, hey, this is probably the chance to jump at Pittsburgh. And as soon as that got announced, right, like, don't see Lamar out here, we saw this market go from, 3 down to 2.5, but everyone who was smart enough to anticipate grabbed 3.5 or better here, and that's ultimately what you've seen. So I think now at this point, not saying Pittsburgh can't cover the 2.5, we've seen all these games be very, very competitive, especially recently between the Steelers and Ravens. But again, with this total at 34.5 and the ability to get this through the 3 and the 7 makes a world of sense for the Steelers to be included in virtually any teaser you're playing this week.
Yeah, so wild when you look at some of Baltimore's struggles offensively. I mean, NFL low, 11.5 points per game in the 4 games since week 13 when Lamar Jackson left with injury. Second worst red zone offense at 39% since week 14 or since week 4. I mean, when they're scoring as far as touchdowns, 17 touchdowns on 44 red zone drives is a little bit of history on the line for the Ravens here. They've gone 14 consecutive games in which they've outrushed their opponent, marking the longest such streak in team history. It's also the league's longest streak since the 2015-16 Panthers outrushed their opponents in 15 straight contests. But yep, if you're looking for high-flying offense, you're looking for big-time fantasy performances, you may want to avert your eyes on New Year's Day, Sunday night, watching the Baltimore Ravens take on the Pittsburgh Steelers.
We'll also have to keep, an eye on Deshaun Jackson, and I know the guy's 48 years old, but he still has enough speed to stretch a defense and create some space for your ground game. He's dealing with a little bit of an illness here, but what's shocking to me is we're talking about the lack of weapons that Baltimore has, but somehow we kind of gravitate back towards Greg Roman and just his inability to do things the right way. It's like, why are we not seeing 2 tight end packages? Like, why is Likely not on the field at the same time as Andrews. Like, likely is one of your better weapons. It's just we haven't designed enough packages for Andrews and likely to be on the field at the same time, and maybe that would enhance your offensive efficiency in terms of throwing the ball a little bit. You know, we haven't seen it.
Well, especially given the struggles we've seen from Mark Andrews. I mean, he's looked like a shell of himself. 8 catches total over his last 3 games. Some of that, of course, is because Tyler Huntley's the one throwing him passes, but hasn't had a 50-yard receiving game during that stretch either.
It's really the only guy you have to game plan for, right?
Well,
because
exactly.
there isn't any imagination.
Yep. Take him out of the mix, and suddenly Baltimore's going to some secondary options to try and move the football through the air. You can follow Payne on Twitter, at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You, of course, can follow me there, as always. And most importantly, follow the podcast, at Bet the Board Pod. A great, extensive college bowl podcast we dropped on Wednesday, covering all 6 New Year's 6 bowl games in great detail. Brad Powers brought his A game, as he always does. A best bet there for one of the biggest bowl games of the postseason. And if you're looking for a way to pass some time during the holiday season in between bowl games, encourage you to check out Cardboard Chat. Payne does an outstanding job hosting Jesse Craig, minority owner of PWCC Marketplace, talking about investing in the card space and some of the secondary options that you have available there. So I want you to explore and identify all aspects of the Bet the Board catalog. All right, my good man, final order of business. It is the last best bet for 2022. Where have you found an actionable element for us above and beyond the extensive breakdowns we've provided here for Sunday's action?
It's a really difficult card to navigate, and it obviously can't go any worse than last week, where the Broncos just simply did not show up. We were looking to extend that streak to 3 straight.
One thing I will say, if we've learned anything from best bets when they go awry, the NFL takes notice, because the Tennessee Titans laid an egg against the Eagles. Their general manager lost his job, and Nathaniel Hackett lays an egg against the Rams. Bet the Board listeners, hey, look, we got your backs. Nathaniel Hackett now out of work as well.
So we've talked a little bit about some of the games, right? We've mulled some of them. I'm not quite sure where the market goes on these, but Tampa obviously shows some value there. I don't think the Dolphins stick it at 3. And, obviously there's been some talks about Jared Stidham knowing the Raiders offense better than anyone in that building. And now that we're at 10, I'm sure they're going to take a little bit of money here with San Francisco. Yes, not really playing for a ton. So those games are probably all going to move in the direction that we've outlined them in. The other one I think we debated was Houston a little bit, but that took money as we are recording down from 5.5 to 4. So, I think maybe we navigate this in the direction that we've kind of broken these games down and maybe go with a 2-team 6-point teaser here. I really believe Pittsburgh is one of the best teaser legs of the season, right? With that total at 34.5, being able to get it back through the 3 and the 7 and pair it with a Seahawks team at home. It's going to have a raucous crowd. Again, shop around there. That line's between 2 and 1.5. You can get the Seahawks as that second leg to plus 7.5 or plus 8 some places. So let's go with that 2-team teaser as the best bet this week with the Steelers to Seahawks.
Yeah, it's all about navigating the board and being able to take advantage of what's out there. We obviously want to put the listeners in the best spot to beat the market. We did so with the Broncos, even if the result wasn't there. You love laying $1.40, $1.45, watching a game close $1.75. Just the players didn't get the memo, and we'll see what we can do this week. Obviously, so many playoff races worth watching. I think a lot of these games will be tightly contested, and we'll see how the market ends up jockeying around a lot of these key numbers. Do you have any invaluable New Year's Eve advice for a lot of the folks that may be just turning of age at 21? Some of the listeners that may be in their teens going out partying on college campuses. I mean, you are a bastion of life advice for some of our younger listenership.
Yeah, I don't really party anymore, but I would.
Well, yeah, you're past your prime.
The whole event is pretty much a sham. So I would save your money and invest it in wiser things. That would be my rule of thumb.
Look at that bitter old man. Get off my lawn. Don't do anything crazy on New Year's Eve. Stay home. Make sure you're of sound mind and body to make sure that you're.
Well, I mean, you can do things, right? I mean, have a little house party, get all your closest friends together, right? The idea of being like Todd Fuhrman in his prime and going to spend 3x on bottle service doesn't make a world of sense.
Let it be known that I never spent 3x on New Year's Eve. Most of those bottles were comped, and it made it extremely extremely difficult for me to get behind the counter at Caesars for the bevy of New Year's Day games that kicked off at 7 a.m. I would typically finish mine at about 4:35, look to shower somewhere, it didn't matter where, throw the suit on, and make sure that I was ready to go for a full day of work. I, of course, don't have that gear, and knowing how early games start here on the West Coast, there's a good chance I'll be falling asleep midway through the fourth quarter unless Georgia and Ohio State are in for a barn burner.
When you get old, and this is what I will say in the last thing before we get out of here, and you actually look back on the money that was spent on liquor and going out, I am like, Jesus. If I would have, put that money towards a stock, put that money towards a couple sports cards, 20, 40, 50x, and so I look at it from that perspective now, and so if I can bestow that wisdom upon the youth, I would certainly go that direction. You can spin it one way, I'll spin it another way. That's why you're the one that's in a little better position financially than I am. You can't take it with you when you go, and sometimes those nights where you spent way too much money on overpriced alcohol leads to some of the best memories that are out there, as Payne can attest to from his time in Nashville, but that's a different story for a different day. Best of luck to all of you, our loyal listeners, with whatever or wherever your investments take you, both on the college and pro side, for the final weekend of football in calendar year 2022. We'll be back with you next week. No Monday podcast, by the way, Payne, because we won't have look headlines or anything. What did we decide for Monday for week 18? This is NFL Week 17. I thought we would be back. Oh, you know what we do? We got Bills. Hold on. We got Bills Bengals, baby. That's like the biggest Monday night game of the season. Yeah, we wouldn't have been doing justice. It might be a little condensed. Yeah. It might be a little condensed with your point to no look headline, so that segment might go awry, but that'll go away. But, I mean, Bills Bengals, got to break that down. Yeah, we'll probably do Bills. Unless you plan on partying and not getting over your sickness. No, I don't plan on partying. My goal is kicking this cold and flu bug or whatever the hell I have going on here. But it's a good point. I completely forgot Bills Bengals. If it was Titans and Cowboys on Monday night, we definitely would have taken the show off. But we'll be back for the biggest Monday Night Football game of the entire season. Again, best of luck. Stay safe. Make good choices out there. Most importantly, when it comes to Sunday of NFL Week 17 with the teaser ticket in hand, we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.